My name is Rebecca Wilson. I'm 38 years old, and I work as a marketing executive in Chicago. As I stood at my mother Eleanor's funeral that rainy morning, I felt numb inside. I dreaded the moment my younger sister Stephanie would arrive. 6 years ago, she destroyed my life in ways I never imagined possible. Back then, I was engaged to Nathan Reynolds, a successful tech millionaire. We were planning our wedding, our future, our dreams, until she stole him from me. I hadn't seen either of them since the day I found out. But today, as she walked in, flaunting her diamond ring with that same smug smile, she had no idea who was waiting to meet her. My mother's funeral smelled of lilies and regret. The scent clung to my black dress, wove into my hair, coated my lungs like ash I couldn't cough out. I stood by her closed casket staring at the framed photograph, propped against white roses. Her smile glowed warm and forgiving, just like she was in life. A smile that once made me believe the world was safe, that I was safe. But standing there, I felt nothing but exhaustion, my knees trembling under the weight of memories I never asked to carry. I glanced at the front doors every few seconds, waiting for the crack in my resolve. Waiting for her to appear. Stephanie, my sister, my betrayer, the girl with golden hair and a honeyed voice who could melt hearts with a single smile. The girl who grew into a woman skilled at stealing what was never hers. The girl who took Nathan from me and called it love. 6 years. That's how long it had been since my life collapsed in the fluorescent-lit office where I found them. 6 years since I watched my future shatter into pieces so small I couldn't pick them up. 6 years of clawing my way out of the darkness alone, of learning to breathe without feeling like each inhale tore open my chest. 6 years of trying to become a woman strong enough to stand here today without crumbling. I heard her before I saw her. The click of designer heels, confident, measured, echoing across the marble floor. My hands curled into fists inside my coat sleeves. I forced myself to turn, and there she was, gliding into the room with Nathan beside her. She wore a fitted black dress hair swept into a low chignon diamond studs, sparkling like frozen tears on her earlobes. Her hand rested possessively on Nathan's arm, fingers brushing the silk of his tailored suit. They looked immaculate, perfect, unbreakable. But when her eyes met mine, her smile faltered for half a second. Just long enough for me to see the truth, hiding beneath her flawless foundation and polished poise. Fear, guilt, recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by that same smug curve of her lips she wore the day I found her kissing my fiancé in his office. Nathan wouldn't meet my gaze. His eyes darted away, landing on the casket, the flowers anywhere but me. He looked older than I remembered, lines carved into the skin around his mouth, hairline thinning, despite his best efforts to hide it with careful styling. The last time I saw him, I was on my knees in our apartment's living room, begging him to tell me why, begging him to love me again, begging him for something, anything to cling to. All he gave me was silence before telling his secretary to escort me out of his office like a disgruntled client. Rebecca Stephanie said, her voice soft with false grief. "I'm so sorry about Mom." I wanted to laugh. Sorry. She'd stolen my fiancé, my dignity, my family's peace, and now she was sorry about Mom. My tongue felt heavy in my mouth, words rotting before they could rise. I nodded once. That was all I could give her. My rage felt dangerous, like black oil slicking every nerve ending. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure I could close it again before I burned the world down around us. She stepped forward to hug our father. He stiffened under her touch, patting her back with mechanical motions. His grief made him fragile, his spirit, a flickering candle threatening to gutter out at the slightest gust of betrayal reborn. Nathan shook Dad's hand with a grave nod, murmuring condolences in that silky voice I once found irresistible. I could almost hear it whispering in my ear, "You're beautiful, Rebecca. No one makes me feel like you do." Lies, all of it. Poison disguised as devotion. My husband Zachary appeared at my side, slipping his arm around my waist. His touch steadied me instantly, like steel hidden beneath velvet. Stephanie's gaze flickered to him with polite curiosity, unaware of who he was, what he represented, what bloodied threads tied him to her husband's downfall. But that moment was still to come, for now she returned her attention to her diamond ring, twisting it around her finger like a talisman, warding off guilt. As I watched her, a memory rose, unbidden, clawing up from the pit of my stomach. Stephanie, 16 years old, stealing my prom dress because it looked better on her. Stephanie, 25, flirting with my coworker at my promotion party until he spent the night at her apartment. Stephanie, 32, sitting across from me at brunch, eyes glittering as I told her Nathan had proposed. "I'm so happy for you, Becca," she'd said, voice dripping with sweetness. But her smile had been too wide, too sharp. I was too blind to see it then. The funeral director called us to take our seats. I placed a trembling hand on my father's back as we walked to the front row. My legs felt numb, each step an act of willpower. As the minister spoke about my mother's kindness, her strength, her unconditional love for her family, I felt my chest tighten until breathing hurt. Tears slid down my cheeks silently. My grief wasn't beautiful or poetic. It was raw and jagged, scraping me open from the inside. I sensed Stephanie's gaze on me throughout the service. Perhaps she was waiting for me to crumble, to fall apart so she could sweep in with her sympathetic sighs and rehearsed sorrow. But I stayed upright. I kept breathing. Because the woman she betrayed 6 years ago was dead. The woman standing here today had been forged in fire and rebuilt from shards. As the service ended, Zachary leaned down, his lips brushing my ear. "I'm right here," he whispered. 3 simple words. 3 words that rebuilt something inside me Stephanie had torn down. I turned to look at him, at the man who loved me without condition or agenda. And in that moment, for the first time since I arrived, I felt strong again. Stephanie had no idea who was standing beside me. But she would soon. And when that moment came, when she realized the man I married was the very man who watched her husband's empire burn to ash, the man who rebuilt me with gentleness and truth, it wouldn't be revenge, it would be revelation. A reminder that what she thought she won was nothing compared to what I found. And as I rose to deliver my eulogy, my mother's final words echoed in my mind. "Forgiveness isn't about them deserving it. It's about you finding peace." My voice shook as I began to speak, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the power of finally standing in my own truth, unbreakable and reborn. The reception after the funeral was a blur of condolences and tasteless coffee in paper cups. People moved around me like ghosts' voices, muffled by the roar of my grief. I stood near the fireplace, clutching a cup I didn't drink, watching Stephanie glide from group to group, her diamond earrings flashing like tiny knives under the chandelier light. Zachary stayed close, speaking softly with my father about pension paperwork and funeral logistics. His quiet competence soothed Dad in a way no words of sympathy could. When he wasn't needed, Zachary's hand would return to my lower back, grounding me, reminding me that I was not alone, not anymore. I felt her before I saw her. Stephanie's perfume drifted to me first, expensive, sharp, cloying. She stopped in front of me, her gaze sweeping over my black dress, my unstyled hair pulled into a low knot. For a fleeting moment, her eyes softened, but then her lips curved upward into that smile I'd grown to despise. "You look well," she said, tone laced with surprise. "Chicago must suit you." I forced a smile. It does. Her eyes flicked to Zachary, who had just returned to my side, placing a protective hand on my hip. "And this is," she asked, her gaze narrowing with subtle appraisal, the predator assessing potential threat. "My husband," I replied simply. Stephanie's eyebrows rose. She shifted her weight, flicking her hair over her shoulder. "Husband. Well, congratulations. And what do you do?" she asked, directing the question at Zachary in that lilting tone she used with powerful men. Zachary turned to her polite smile in place. "I'm in venture capital." Nathan's voice cut through the room like breaking glass. "Foster." We turned to see him standing there, pale beneath his tan eyes, wide with a recognition so sudden it almost looked like fear. His gaze darted between Zachary and me, then back to Zachary, who regarded him with detached amusement. "Reynolds," Zachary said, his voice calm, almost bored. "It's been, 7 years since Macintosh acquired Innotech over CompuServe, right?" Nathan swallowed, visibly adjusting his tie with a trembling hand. Yes, that was quite the deal," his voice cracked. "You two are married." 2 years now," I replied, slipping my arm through Zachary's, feeling his warmth radiate into my chilled skin. I turned my eyes to Nathan and watched as the blood drained from his face. There was something intoxicating about that moment, not because I wanted revenge, but because I saw the truth. Nathan had once been my entire world. Now he was just a man who made the wrong choices and was paying for them day by day behind the glimmering facade he so desperately maintained. Stephanie's eyes darted between us, confusion clouding her perfectly lined features. Foster Investments. Zachary inclined his head. "That's right. Rebecca and I met at a tech conference in San Francisco." For a moment, silence engulfed our small circle. The only sound was the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the low murmur of mourners reminiscing about my mother. Nathan's jaw clenched as he tried to regain composure. "We should catch up sometime," he said, his voice regaining a flicker of its old charm. "I've been meaning to reach out about a potential collaboration." Zachary's smile remained pleasant, but his eyes were steel. "My schedule's quite full, but you can contact my office if you'd like." Stephanie's fingers fluttered nervously around her necklace. For the first time, she seemed unsure, her earlier smugness dissolving under the tension crackling in the air. "Excuse us," I said, softly tugging Zachary away. As we moved toward my father, I felt Nathan's eyes burning into my back. Let him watch, I thought. Let him watch the woman he threw away, build a life he could never touch. Later in the car, as Zachary drove us back to the hotel, the city lights streaking past like comets, I turned to him. "Thank you," I whispered. For what, he asked, glancing at me briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "For being exactly who you are. For not needing to destroy him. For letting him destroy himself." Zachary reached for my hand, bringing it to his lips. "He was never worth your tears, Rebecca. And he's not worth your rage. You've built a life beyond his shadow. That's the real victory." I stared out the window, the ache in my chest loosening. In that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't a single decision. It was 1,000 small choices every day to let go of what could never be changed. And though Stephanie remained a ghost, haunting the corners of my past, her power over me faded each time I chose love over bitterness. Nathan Reynolds, once the sun around which my world revolved, was nothing but a dying star. And me, I was reborn, blazing brighter than he could ever dim. That night, the rain fell hard against our hotel window, blurring the city lights into trembling orbs of gold. I stood before the full-length mirror, unzipping my black funeral dress, watching it slip to the carpet like a snake shedding its old skin. My reflection stared back at me, pale shoulders, thin lines under my eyes, hair coming loose from its pins. For a moment, I didn't see a strong woman who had survived betrayal and loss. I saw her the broken girl kneeling on the office floor 6 years ago, her voice ragged from crying hands, outstretched to a man who never deserved her devotion. My breath caught in my throat. My chest tightened with an ache so old and deep, it felt like it lived inside my bones. I gripped the sink, forcing myself to breathe as memories assaulted me. Nathan's cold eyes, Stephanie's triumphant smirk, my mother's voice begging me to find peace. The bathroom door opened softly behind me. Zachary stepped in, his tie-loosened sleeves, rolled-up hair tousled from running his hands through it. His eyes met mine in the mirror. Calm, dark, unwavering. Rebecca. His voice was low and steady. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't need to. I turned to face him, tears welling hot and sudden. "Why does it still hurt?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why, after all these years, after everything I've built, why do they still have this power over me?" He crossed the room and took my hands in his thumbs brushing over my trembling fingers. "Because pain carves deep," he said softly. "But listen to me." He lifted my chin so my eyes met his. Their power ends where you decide it does. My tears fell freely now, silent rivers down my cheeks. I hate that they ever mattered. Zachary's gaze didn't waver. They don't anymore. Not here. He pressed his palm gently over my heart. "Not in this life you've built, not in this room, not in this moment." I closed my eyes, letting his touch ground me. The panic loosened its grip. My breathing steadied. When I opened my eyes again, I saw him fully, this man, who never once demanded my healing to be quick or clean, who stood in the mess of my past with me without flinching. He cupped my face, his thumb tracing the curve of my jaw. "You are not the woman who begged him to stay," he said, voice fierce and quiet. "You are not the sister who lost everything. You are not broken. You're here, with me, exactly as you are." I exhaled shakily, my tears slowing. "I'm so tired, Zachary." "Then rest," he whispered. He kissed my forehead, then my lips soft, unhurried, nothing asked in return. "Let me hold you. You don't have to be strong right now." He led me to bed, pulling back the covers. I slid under them, feeling their cool softness envelop my skin. He lay down behind me, his chest warm against my back, his arms circling my waist. For the first time in years, I felt safe enough to close my eyes without fear of what dreams might come. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean. Inside, in the quiet darkness of our hotel room, something inside me shifted. The rage dulled to sorrow, the sorrow softened to grief, and beneath it all, hidden but steady, bloomed something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. That morning, as sunlight spilled across the hotel sheets, I lay awake beside Zachary, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. His breathing was steady, anchoring me to this quiet dawn. My mind drifted back to the office years ago. Nathan's hands on Stephanie's waist, their kiss so hungry it carved scars across my soul. The scent of her floral perfume mixing with his cologne. The lunch bag slipping from my grasp. The betrayal sharper than any blade. I thought I'd never stand up again after that day. But yesterday, in that funeral home, I saw Nathan's eyes fill with fear when Zachary spoke his name. "Foster." He croaked, voice cracking under the weight of old rivalries and unspoken truths. Zachary remained calm, his smile gentle but his gaze cold. "My schedule's quite full, but you can contact my office if you'd like." That moment was power, not revenge, not cruelty, just power. The silent knowing that I no longer needed his validation, that the life I had built made his existence irrelevant. Stephanie's voice from the funeral echoed in my chest. I got the man the money, the mansion. And yet later in my parents' kitchen, she sat hunched over her untouched coffee mascara, smudged with tears. I'm miserable, Rebecca. He controls everything, monitors my spending, questions every movement. I destroyed our family for an illusion. She looked so small then, so breakable. The girl who once strutted in heels that clicked like victory bells now crumbled under their weight. And in that moment, something unexpected bloomed in me. Not pity, not forgiveness, but a strange, heavy understanding. She would live her punishment every day, trapped in a gilded cage she chose for herself. When she left that night, her words lingered in the quiet house. I don't deserve forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth before I blow up my life again. And my mother's final journal entry returned to me. My greatest regret is leaving with my girls still estranged. Forgiveness isn't about them deserving it. It's about you freeing yourself. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Zachary, and moved to the window. The city glowed gold and white under the rising sun. For the first time in years, I felt no bitterness in my chest. Just a tender ache for who I used to be. The woman who gave her heart to the wrong man, who thought betrayal was the end of her story. Zachary stirred behind me. Rebecca, he called softly, voice husky with sleep. I turned, meeting his warm brown eyes. In them I saw every promise kept, every pain held, gently, every wound kissed and left to heal without judgment. Come back to bed, he murmured, holding out his hand. I slipped beneath the covers, curling into his warmth. His arms wrapped around me, grounding me in the truth of my life now. I love you, I whispered against his chest. I know, he breathed into my hair. And I love you exactly as you are, always. Outside, the city woke with its usual chaos, but in this room there was only stillness, only peace. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me, knowing I would never again beg for love from those who thrived on my breaking. I had found something better. I had found myself. It started small, almost invisible, like a hairline crack in glass. You only notice when the light hits it just right, and by then the fracture has already spread beneath the surface, ready to shatter with the slightest pressure. At first, it was just Nathan coming home later than usual. Investor meetings, he'd say, brushing off my questions with a distracted kiss that landed somewhere on my temple before he disappeared into his office, the glow of his phone illuminating his sharp features. His eyes rarely met mine anymore. When they did, they held none of the warmth that used to melt me from the inside out. Instead, his gaze was cool, indifferent, sliding over me like I was a painting he'd once admired, but now found irrelevant. One Friday evening, we went to our favorite Italian restaurant downtown, the place we used to sneak into for late-night tiramisu, and whispered dreams about our future. I wore the sapphire blue dress he'd once said made me look like royalty. I still remembered his exact words that night. You walk in wearing that, and the world bows down. But this time, as we sat across from each other, candlelight dancing against the glass of red wine between us, he barely looked up from his phone. His thumbs tapped rapidly on the screen, the glow painting his cheekbones in hard shadows. You look tired, he muttered, not even glancing up as he typed. I swallowed the burn in my throat and forced a smile. It's been a long week. His eyes flicked up for half a second, cold and assessing. That dress washes you out. You should wear something warmer next time. Something inside me fractured at that. A quiet, splintering snap no one else heard, but I felt it. Deep, permanent. Then came Stephanie. Her presence wove itself through our life like smoke, seeping into every room, every phone call, every breath I took. She called daily with questions about floral arrangements, cake tasting, seating charts. I just want your wedding to be perfect. Becca, she'd say in that syrupy voice that dripped concern, while her laughter rang in the background. Laughter, I realized, was Nathan's too. Sometimes before I even picked up her call, I could hear him talking to her in the background, his voice warm and alive with humor. I hadn't heard in weeks. But the worst came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was cleaning out Nathan's car before our dinner party, humming under my breath to keep the anxiety at bay. My fingers brushed something hard wedged between the seat and the console. I pulled it out, a sapphire earring, tiny, elegant, familiar, Stephanie's. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs I thought they would crack open. That earring had been our grandmother's. Stephanie wore it to our engagement party, twirling it between her fingers as she raised her glass to toast us with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My stomach twisted into sickening knots. That night after the guests had left, I held it out to Nathan. My hand trembled so violently, the earring rattled in my palm like a death knell. He barely blinked. Oh, she must have dropped it when I drove her to the florist last week. My voice came out strangled. You never told me you drove her, didn't I? He sipped his Scotch eyes on the amber liquid, unbothered. It wasn't important. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Later I called Stephanie. Her voice dripped with feigned relief. Oh, thank God I've been looking everywhere for it. Nathan was kind enough to drive me while my car was in the shop. Their words fit together too perfectly, like puzzle pieces, like practiced lines from a script they'd rehearsed 100 times, like lovers. That night I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling fan, slicing the darkness into spinning shadows. Doubt seeped into every crack of my mind, thick and suffocating. Each breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. My chest ached with the weight of sobs I refused to let him hear. Because some betrayals don't come as gunshots or slammed doors. Some come quietly, as missed kisses, as glances that no longer linger, as small whispered lies told with the same ease as breathing. The next morning I booked my first therapy appointment. Because I realized something that night, some betrayals begin long before the final blow. They start as invisible fractures beneath the surface, spreading further with each casual cruelty, until you're left lying in a cold bed beside the man you love, wondering when exactly he stopped loving you back and whether he ever truly did. I remember everything about that day with vicious clarity. The sharp bite of the January wind as it sliced through my coat while I crossed the street to Nathan's gleaming office tower. The sky was a flat, lifeless gray, matching the way I'd felt waking up beside him that morning, him scrolling emails in bed, barely glancing at me as I whispered goodbye. I clutched the lunch bag tight to my chest, its warmth seeping through the paper, dampening it with the sweat of my palm. Inside was his favorite sandwich from the tiny deli near my work turkey provolone, a smear of spicy mustard, a small desperate olive branch, to bridge the chasm silently widening between us. The security guard smiled at me as I entered the marble lobby, bringing lunch for Mr. Reynolds. Today, Ms. Wilson. I forced a smile, my lips trembling around the edges. Just a little surprise. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like rising into purgatory. The fluorescent lights above flickered, humming with secrets I hadn't yet uncovered, while my reflection in the mirrored panel looked hollow-eyed, my mouth set in a line of silent dread. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the hushed reception area. Margot, his secretary, looked up from her computer. For a split second, her eyes widened in something like panic, before her face smoothed back into polite professionalism. "Rebecca, we weren't expecting you." "That's okay," I said, lifting the bag slightly, my voice sugar-sweet and trembling. "I brought lunch. I'll just take it in." Margot stood so abruptly her chair screeched back against the floor. She moved to block my path, hands twisting together nervously. "Actually, he's in a meeting right now. Maybe I can let him know you're here? Is he alone in there? Margot, I asked quietly. She flinched at the question. Her eyes darted to the closed frosted glass door behind her, then back to me. Her lips parted to speak, but no words came. The silence told me everything I needed to know. My feet carried me forward before my brain could catch up. I walked past her heels, silent against the plush carpet, my pulse a war drum against my ribs. The doorknob was cold and smooth beneath my trembling fingers as I twisted it open. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Stephanie was perched on Nathan's mahogany desk skirt, bunched up around her hips, her perfect legs wrapped around his waist. His hands gripped her tightly, fingers digging into her thighs, as if he'd die if he let go. Their mouths were fused in a kiss so desperate, so hungry, it carved into my chest like a serrated blade. They didn't notice me at first, and in that brief, eternal moment I saw everything. Stephanie's manicured nails tangled in his hair, tugging him closer. His tie hung loose, his shirt rumpled and half untucked where her hands had roamed. Their breathing filled the room with a ragged, primal rhythm that vibrated through my bones. The door clicked shut behind me. They froze. Stephanie blinked, her lipstick-smudged eyes glittering with something between guilt and triumph. Nathan straightened his tie, his mask of composure sliding back onto his face with chilling ease. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, as if we were discussing a minor clerical error instead of the implosion of my world. A laugh burst from my throat, brittle, sharp, echoing harshly against the glass walls. It felt foreign in my mouth, scraping against my teeth like broken glass. How long, I asked, my voice eerily calm, though my entire body was trembling. "Rebecca." Nathan began, his hand reaching out. "How long?" I repeated louder this time, the words cracking like a whip. Stephanie's shoulders slumped, the color draining from her face as she whispered, "Since the engagement party." My knees threatened to buckle, but I locked them in place. I wouldn't fall. I wouldn't give them that. My lungs burned as if the air had been sucked from the room. 4 months, I said softly. 4 months of lies, of sneaking around, of sleeping beside me while betraying me with my own sister. Nathan moved behind his desk, creating distance between us like a coward bracing for an incoming storm. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Rebecca. Sometimes feelings change. I was going to tell you." "After what?" My voice rose, slicing the sterile air between us. "After the wedding, after our honeymoon. After you completely destroyed what little dignity I had left." His lips twitched with practiced indifference. Negotiator mode. The ruthless CEO in him surfacing, ready to contain the damage. I was trying to find the right time. The lunch bag slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the polished floor with a dull, final thud. The smell of turkey and mustard filled the room, mingling with the nauseating scent of their betrayal. Stephanie blinked rapidly, tears threatening to smudge her perfect eyeliner. "It just happened, Becca. We tried to fight it." "Don't call me that," I whispered. The childhood nickname burned like acid on my tongue. Nothing just happens for 4 months. Every kiss, every secret meeting, every time you looked me in the eye and lied that wasn't an accident. Nathan pressed the intercom button on his desk, his eyes never meeting mine. "Margot, please come in." Moments later, Margot appeared at the door, her face, pale eyes wide with horror. "Please escort Rebecca out. She's upset." I straightened my spine, swallowing the scream clawing up my throat. My chest ached with unshed sobs, but I forced them down into the pit of my stomach where they burned like acid. "I'm escorting myself out," I said, my voice low, cold, unbreakable. I turned to Stephanie, my gaze steady as ice. "You win," I whispered. "Enjoy your prize." As I walked past Margot down the pristine hallway, lined with framed certificates, smiling photos and million-dollar contracts. I felt something deep inside me shatter into jagged shards. But beneath the wreckage, a quieter, stronger voice rose from the rubble. Let it break. Let it all break. Because what survives this will be unbreakable. I don't remember the drive home. I only remember gripping the steering wheel so hard. My knuckles burned white against the leather, the tendons in my wrists screaming with tension. My vision blurred with tears that refused to fall, clinging stubbornly to my lashes, as if releasing them would make everything real. The city lights smeared into streaks of neon and shadow, an abstract painting of a world I no longer belonged to. These were the same streets Nathan once kissed me on after expensive dinners, pressing me against brick walls with breathless laughter. The same corners where I'd wait heart racing for his sleek black car to pull up and whisk me away. The same skyline that framed the life I thought was mine, a life built on rotting foundations I had been too blinded to see. When I finally pulled into my building, I couldn't remember parking, couldn't remember climbing the stairs. My keys fell from my trembling fingers onto the hardwood floor with a clatter that echoed through the silent apartment like a gunshot. My body moved on autopilot, stumbling into the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I collapsed onto the cold tile, my knees buckling under the weight of everything I'd just seen. My body folded over itself like paper set on fire, crumpling into a heap of agony. The first sob ripped out of me so violently it felt like my ribs might crack. Then another, and another, until the sounds coming from my throat no longer sounded human. They were raw animal screams that scraped my throat until I tasted blood that tore through my chest, like claws raking open old wounds I thought had long since scarred over. I grabbed a towel and buried my face in it, screaming into the fabric until my voice broke, until my entire body shook with silent, convulsing sobs, until there was nothing left inside me but emptiness and the ragged, broken sound of my own breathing. My phone lay on the counter, vibrating with missed calls and messages. I reached for it with numb fingers and dialed the only number that made sense through the haze of betrayal. My mother answered on the second ring. "Rebecca? What's wrong?" Words tumbled out in jagged fragments, each syllable tasting like acid on my tongue. Nathan, Stephanie together, I saw them. Mom, I saw them. There was a silence on the other end. Then her voice cracked, trembling, with a grief only a mother can feel for her child. "We're coming." Within an hour, I heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps. Then her arms were around me, pulling me up off the cold tile, cradling me against her chest, like I was still 5 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. I sobbed into her shoulder, her tears soaking into my hair as she rocked me back and forth, whispering words I couldn't hear through the roar in my ears. My father paced the living room, his heavy boots thudding against the floor with every turn. His fists were clenched so tightly, his knuckles gleamed like polished bone. "I'll kill him," he growled, his voice trembling with rage, so potent the air around him vibrated. "I swear to God I'll kill him," Thomas, my mother, whispered through her sobs. "Your blood pressure." But I didn't hear them. Their voices were muffled, distant, like they were speaking to me from the other side of thick glass. My eyes were fixed on the window above the kitchen sink, watching the silent snowfall. Flakes drifted down in slow motion, settling against the pane in delicate, perfect patterns. Outside, the world continued turning with its usual indifference. Cars drove by, streetlights flickered on somewhere. A siren wailed in the night. Inside, everything I knew burned to ash. And as I sat there in my mother's arms, my tears finally falling, I realized something that cut deeper than any betrayal. I wasn't mourning just Nathan. I was mourning the woman I'd been when I woke up that morning. The woman who still believed love could save her. That woman was gone now, buried beneath the ruins of everything she thought was real. What remained was raw, shattered, and for the first time in my life, terrifyingly free. The first weeks in Chicago tasted like cold coffee and stale air. My apartment was small and bare, a one-bedroom box stacked high in a faceless tower. Its white walls echoed every thought I tried to silence, bouncing them back at me until they roared in my skull. Cardboard boxes lined the entryway like silent sentinels untouched. I slept on a mattress thrown directly onto the hardwood floor, too exhausted to assemble the bed frame that lay in pieces beside me, like broken bones. Each night I lay flat on my back, staring up at the cracked ceiling as shadows danced across it from the streetlights below. The distant rumble of passing trains rattled the thin window panes, their screeching wheels slicing through the darkness like knives. I thought about Boston, about them, about how a single choice, or maybe 1,000 small choices, had carved me out of my own life and left me here an echo of a woman I no longer recognized. Sometimes I woke up with tears dried stiff on my cheeks, my throat raw from sobs I hadn't realized escaped me. My chest ached as though someone had driven iron rods between my ribs and twisted them until breathing felt like punishment. In those hazy moments between sleep and waking, I'd reach out blindly across the mattress, expecting to find Nathan's warm, solid body there, expecting to feel his slow, steady breathing beneath my palm. But all I ever found was emptiness, cold sheets, silence that screamed. I worked long hours, arriving before sunrise and leaving long after the city had drowned itself in darkness. My colleagues called me impressive, dedicated, a machine. They admired my polished presentations, my strategic precision, my perfect metrics. But they didn't see the truth that I buried myself in projects, because the silence terrified me. Because the idea of coming home to a dark, empty apartment felt like dying again over and over each night, a slow funeral for a life I'd never get back. Every morning as I brushed my hair and tied it back with mechanical movements, I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror, hollow eyes, clenched jaw, shoulders, hunched as if bracing for a blow that never came. And in those quiet, unguarded moments, I wondered if I'd ever feel warmth again, if I'd ever stand beneath the morning sun and feel it on my skin, instead of the relentless, gnawing cold that lived in my bones. But each day I pulled on my coat, wrapped my scarf tight around my neck, and walked out into the bitter Chicago wind. Because moving forward, even numb and broken, still felt better than standing still in the ruins. Chicago greeted me with sleet and silence. As the cab wound through dark streets lined with bare trees, clawing at the winter sky, I pressed my forehead to the cold window. The city lights blurred into trembling constellations. I didn't feel hope. I didn't feel fear. I felt nothing, just the quiet ache of a heart that had forgotten how to beat for anything but survival. My new apartment was a sterile white box on the 12th floor, overlooking an alley. The air smelled faintly of paint and damp concrete. I dropped my suitcase in the center of the room and stood there listening to the hum of the old refrigerator, the drip of a leaking faucet, and the ragged sound of my own breathing. I didn't cry. Grief was no longer a flood. It was stone, heavy, immovable, cold. Each morning I woke before dawn and ran along the frozen riverwalk until my lungs burned and my legs trembled. Showered under scalding water that scrubbed away the sweat and the tears before either could be seen. Painted on mascara and a polite, hollow smile. Walked into the office with shoulders squared, eyes dead. My colleagues called me unstoppable, brilliant, a machine. They didn't see the woman rotting beneath her own armor. At night I lay on a mattress on the floor, staring at the cracked ceiling, the city's sirens wailing like distant ghosts. Some nights I pressed my fingers so hard into my temples that sparks exploded behind my eyelids, anything to burn out the memory of them. Stephanie's diamond earrings catching the office light, Nathan's hands gripping her waist, their kiss greedy and familiar, my own voice in that fluorescent room. How long? Her whisper soft and unashamed since the engagement party. 2 months later, my boss sent me to San Francisco for a technology conference. The thought of crowds and bright lights made bile rise in my throat, but refusing wasn't an option. On the second evening, I found myself at a networking dinner. Crystal glasses, linen tablecloths, the city shimmering outside like a frozen ocean of light. I sat silent at the end of a long table, picking at grilled salmon that tasted of nothing. Listening to men boast about angel investments in voices dripping with arrogance and boredom. Excuse me. His voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Calm, deep, unhurried. I looked up. He had dark hair streaked with gray at the temples, sharp cheekbones softened by faint smile lines, eyes so dark they were almost black, watching me with quiet curiosity instead of appraisal. I couldn't help overhearing your thoughts on brand pivoting in saturated markets, he said. Brilliant insight. My throat closed. Words felt alien in my mouth. Thank you. He extended his hand. Zachary Foster. Foster Investments. The name slammed into me like a punch to the chest. Foster. But his gaze held no arrogance, only calm gravity. I placed my hand in his. His grip was warm, steady, grounding. The next morning, his email arrived at 7:04 a.m. Coffee before the sessions. Would love to hear more of your thoughts. My pulse fluttered, fear gnawing at my ribs, but my fingers typed yes. Over coffee, he listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with clarity and quiet conviction that drew me in like gravity. When I returned to Chicago, we emailed about projects, marketing, trends, psychology of consumer loyalty. Each time his name appeared in my inbox, that ember in my chest glowed a little warmer. 3 months later, he asked me to dinner. I read the email 3 times, hands trembling. Nathan's ghost rose inside me, whispering, "You'll never be enough. No one will ever love you again." But I said yes. He chose a restaurant, lined with bookshelves and flickering candles. No white tablecloths, no clinking crystal. Just warmth and jazz and shadows curling soft around us. He wore a navy suit with no tie shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He smelled of cedarwood and rain. His eyes never left mine as we spoke about poetry, childhood, grief, the violence of loving the wrong people. Halfway through dessert, panic struck. My chest tightened, breath shortened. The room tilted and darkened at the edges. I pushed back from the table abruptly, the chair scraping loud against wood. "I'm sorry," I gasped, standing. "I have to go." I stumbled outside into the Chicago night, cold air slicing my skin. Tears blurred the orange glow of streetlights as nausea twisted my stomach into knots. He followed silently, stopping a few steps away. Didn't touch me. Didn't speak until my sobs subsided into ragged breaths. Then softly, "Rebecca, look at me." I turned. His gaze was steady, warm, unafraid of my brokenness. "This doesn't have to be anything tonight, or ever if you're not ready. I just want to know you're okay." His words cracked something inside me. I sobbed, folding in on myself, shaking with shame and grief. He sat beside me on the bench, silent, breathing slow, until my lungs found his rhythm. When I finally calmed, he hailed a cab and tucked me inside. "Text me when you're home," he said. The next morning, flowers arrived at my office. White tulips and eucalyptus. Clean, quiet, pure. The note read, "No pressure, no expectations. Just hoping you're feeling better today. Zachary." That evening I called him. My voice shook as I spoke. I told him everything: Nathan, Stephanie, Boston, my humiliation, my rage, my emptiness. He listened in silence. When I finished, there was only the soft crackle of the phone line. Then he spoke, voice thick with empathy. "Broken trust leaves scars, Rebecca. Anyone worth your time will understand healing isn't linear. In the months that followed, we built something I didn't know could exist." He never pushed, never demanded. He cooked me dinner on Fridays, filling his apartment with the scent of rosemary and garlic candles, flickering against old brick walls. When panic rose, he held my hand and breathed slow, his chest expanding with a calm that steadied my own. One dawn, I woke in his bed. The window glowed with soft blue light. I lay watching him sleep, his chest rising and falling, his hand resting palm up between us. I reached out, traced the lines of his fingers. He stirred, eyes blinking open, focusing on me with sleepy tenderness. "Morning," he rasped, voice rough and real. "Morning," I whispered back. And in that quiet room wrapped in dawn and him, I realized forgiveness wasn't surrender. Forgiveness was freedom, because Nathan may have been my ending, but Zachary was my resurrection. Spring came to Chicago in slow sighs. Rain washed away winter's salt-stained scars, leaving sidewalks damp and clean. Buds pushed through branches like small clenched fists, daring to bloom. The city smelled of thawing earth and something like hope. Almost a year had passed since I met Zachary. A year of Friday nights cooking pasta in his kitchen jazz, humming low from speakers as garlic sizzled in olive oil. A year of dawns spent curled against his chest, listening to the slow certainty of his breathing, letting it teach my own lungs how to trust again. A year of panic attacks met with quiet hands and steady words that anchored rather than trapped. One Friday, he texted me mid-afternoon. "Don't plan dinner. Pack an overnight bag. Comfortable shoes." We drove north for hours, city towers giving way to flat roads lined with oak and maple, their branches unfurling new green against a sky-bruised purple with approaching dusk. He held my hand across the console, thumb, stroking slow circles over my knuckles. The radio played old folk songs, voices rasping about love and loss and homecoming. He booked us a room at a small bed and breakfast, surrounded by vineyards. The floors creaked under our steps, and the windows were framed in thick ivory drapes, embroidered with climbing roses. The owner, an elderly woman with wild gray curls, pressed warm scones into our hands when we arrived. I remember thinking, this is what safe feels like. Quiet, warm, real. The next day, we wandered rows of grapevines heavy with swelling fruit. The air smelled of sweet grass and sun-warmed wood. Bees droned lazily from blossom to blossom. He walked beside me in silence, our shoulders brushing occasionally, and each touch sent small sparks under my skin. Not the electric panic I once mistook for love, but something softer, calmer, steady like the pull of tide under moonlight. That night, he took me to the Chicago Botanic Garden. The sun slipped low, staining the sky in lavender and rose. He led me along winding stone paths until we reached a trellis wrapped in climbing roses, their pale petals trembling under the evening breeze. Fairy lights twined among branches, glowing softly against the encroaching dark. "Rebecca," he said, turning to face me. He took both my hands in his. His eyes were dark and solemn, under the blush of fading light. "This past year, knowing you, loving you, it has been the greatest gift of my life." Panic flared sharp and sudden in my chest as he reached into his pocket. Images of Nathan's yacht flashed behind my eyes. His rehearsed smile, the glittering ring, the proposal staged like a magazine spread hiding betrayal, already blooming in secret. But Zachary's voice pulled me back. It was low, rough, with emotion vibrating through the cold spring air and into my bones. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he said. "I just want you to know that whenever you're ready tomorrow, next year, or never, I will be here, loving you, exactly as you are." He opened the box. Inside lay a ring unlike anything Nathan ever gave me. Not a monstrous diamond meant to blind rooms of strangers. Not a trophy. Not proof of conquest. It was an emerald deep and alive, flanked by 2 small diamonds. Understated. Elegant. Real. Tears blurred the roses, the fairy lights the man kneeling before me. My hands trembled in his. Fear whispered, "You will never be enough." But beneath it something stronger rose from the ashes of the woman I once was. A voice that said, "You already are?" "Yes." I whispered, my voice shaking but sure. "I'm ready now." He slid the ring onto my finger, his hands warm and steady. When he stood, he pulled me into his chest, his arms wrapping around me, with a quiet fierceness that said, "You are safe here. You are home." That night in his apartment, he lay with his forehead pressed to mine, breath mingling with mine in the dark. "Thank you," he whispered, voice raw, "for trusting me with your heart." I swallowed the ache rising in my throat. Thank you for never asking me to be anything but myself. Weeks later at a business dinner, a venture capitalist mentioned Nathan offhandedly. Reynolds. Yeah, he and Foster used to go head-to-head in angel investing. Foster backed the right AI startup. Reynolds picked the competitor, tanked it, nearly bankrupted him. That night, as we sat on our balcony under a sky spattered with city lights, I asked, "You knew who Nathan was when we met, didn't you?" He didn't flinch. He took a sip of his whiskey, the glass catching the glow of street lamps below. "I knew of him," he said quietly. "But I wanted you to know me for me, not as someone tied to your past." I nodded, feeling the last ghost of Nathan dissolve into the warm spring night, scattering like ashes over the dark water. Months later, as we painted the nursery, a soft sage green, I sat cross-legged on the tarp-covered floor, watching sunlight filter through gauzy curtains, catching dust motes that spun like gold. Zachary knelt before me, paint streaked across his cheekbone, eyes shining as he pressed his palm to my still flat belly. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he whispered. Tears burned behind my eyes. "Only because I get to do this with you." He kissed me, then slow and deep tasting of hope, and everything I thought I lost, but found again in him. In that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't surrender. It wasn't absolution for those who broke me. Forgiveness was choosing to live free of the chains they tried to lock around my heart. Nathan broke me. Stephanie betrayed me. But Zachary didn't save me. He simply waited at the gates of my resurrection and walked me home. Rain fell in thin silver lines against the kitchen window, blurring the brick buildings across the alley into muted shadows. I stood at the counter, fingers curled around a chipped mug of cold coffee, listening to the quiet drip of the faucet. My father had gone to visit Uncle Mark. Zachary was back in Chicago for meetings. The house felt emptier than it ever had, each room echoing with the ghosts of a family that no longer existed. The doorbell rang. Its shrill chime sliced through the silence, cutting into my bones. I set the mug down its porcelain, clinking softly against the granite countertop, and walked slowly to the door. Through the warped glass, I saw Stephanie standing on the porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself, hair plastered to her cheeks by rain. She looked smaller somehow, deflated, like a balloon left to wither in a forgotten corner. When I opened the door, she didn't speak. She just stood there, shivering, mascara smudged into gray shadows beneath her eyes. Her perfume, always too sweet, too heavy, was muted by the dampness clinging to her. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I stepped aside. She moved past me, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood, before she slipped them off and padded barefoot into the kitchen. She sat at the table, curling into herself like a child left out in the cold. I made coffee. I said quietly. It's old. She shook her head, eyes glassy and unfocused. For a long time we sat in silence, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock and the rain beating softly against the windows. Finally, her shoulders began to tremble. Tears slipped down her cheeks, carving clean lines through smudged foundation. Her voice cracked open like something broken beyond repair. I can't do it anymore, Rebecca. I said nothing. The anger in me was coiled and silent, like a serpent sleeping in the sun, watching, waiting. He controls everything, she choked out. My spending, my phone, who I talk to, where I go. He checks my emails, my call history. He tells me what to wear, what to say at business dinners. And if I don't. Her breath hitched shoulders, shaking harder. He doesn't hit me. Not with fists. Just his words, his eyes, his silence. I closed my own eyes, pressing my palm to the smooth, cold granite of the counter. Nathan. Always Nathan. A poison that killed slowly, molecule by molecule. His company's failing, she whispered. He's leveraged everything, the house, the cars, his investments. He hides it, but I see the calls, the threats, the desperation. He isn't who I thought he was. Maybe he never was. The rain outside thickened, drumming harder against the glass like impatient fingers. I'm miserable, Rebecca, she sobbed, voice shredding under the weight of truth. I've been miserable for so long. I destroyed our family for him. I destroyed you. And now I can't breathe. I hired a divorce lawyer. I'm leaving him. I needed you to know. For a long moment I said nothing. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of betrayal and childhood secrets. I watched her, this woman, who was once the little girl, who slept in my bed during thunderstorms, who braided my hair before prom, who clung to my arm when father yelled too loud. Now she sat before me, hollowed out her beauty, crumbling at the edges, her pride lying in shards at her feet. I can't forgive you, I said softly. My voice didn't tremble. It was calm, certain. Not yet. She nodded, tears dripping onto her shaking hands. I know. But I continued staring at the rain sliding down the window in trembling lines of silver. I feel lighter. Hearing you say it. Hearing you finally admit it. She let out a sound between a sob and a laugh, pressing her hands to her mouth as fresh tears spilled from her eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered through her fingers. I'm so sorry. I didn't tell her it was okay. I didn't touch her hand. I didn't lie to soothe her guilt. But in that silent kitchen, something shifted. A chain loosened from around my chest. The serpent of anger lifted its head, uncoiling slightly, tasting freedom in the cold, still air. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first step toward letting go. The morning I left Boston, the city was wrapped in fog. Gray light seeped through my childhood bedroom window, softening the sharp corners of old memories. I stood in the doorway, suitcase at my feet, staring at the bed where I once dreamed of fairy tale weddings and quiet suburban happiness. Those dreams lay buried now beneath layers of betrayal and grief and rage, composted into something stronger, something truer. Father hugged me at the door, his arms trembling around my shoulders. You show them, kiddo, he whispered, voice rough with tears he refused to shed. Build a life so good they choke on their regret. I kissed his cheek. I will. Outside, Zachary waited by the car, hands in his pockets, eyes warm and steady when they met mine. He didn't ask if I was ready. He simply opened the passenger door and waited. The drive to Logan was silent. My hand rested on his thigh, his fingers curled over mine. The radio played quietly, an old love song humming beneath the roar of highway. As the city skyline slid away behind us, I felt my chest loosen. The knot of grief and rage and guilt unraveled thread by thread, replaced by something softer, something like relief. At the airport, he pulled me close, pressing his forehead to mine. "Home," he asked. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cedarwood warmth of him. "Home," I whispered. The plane lifted through clouds heavy with unshed rain. Below, Boston shrank into a sprawl of concrete and memory, the Atlantic glinting steel gray beyond its borders. I watched until the coastline blurred into sky. For a moment, grief rose sharp in my throat. But then I pressed my palm to the tiny window and whispered a silent goodbye. I wasn't running anymore. I was returning to myself, to the life I chose, to the woman I became after the woman I used to be died on an office floor in Boston 6 years ago. Chicago greeted me with soft spring rain and the scent of thawing soil. Zachary drove us home through streets lined with budding trees, their branches trembling with newborn green. Our brownstone weighted its brick walls dark with rain, ivy curling along window frames. Home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen. I walked from room to room, touching walls, bookshelves, framed photographs of us laughing in vineyards and standing arm in arm by Lake Michigan, hair whipped wild by cold wind. Each room whispered, "You belong here." Zachary stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, slicing lemons for tea. He glanced up as I entered, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Welcome home." I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around his waist, pressing my face into his chest. His heart beat strong and certain beneath my cheek. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." His hand slid into my hair fingers, massaging my scalp in slow, soothing circles. "Thank you," he murmured back, "for choosing to stay." That evening we sat on the balcony, city lights flickering below like fallen stars scattered across dark water. I sipped ginger tea, feeling its warmth bloom down my throat and into my chest. Zachary draped a blanket over my shoulders, his palm resting against the back of my neck, thumb, stroking the tense ridge of muscle there. "Thinking about her?" he asked softly. I nodded, staring at the moon haloed in drifting clouds. "She's leaving him. Stephanie. She's broken Zachary. But there was a moment today when I realized I don't hate her anymore. I thought I would, but I just don't." "That's forgiveness," he said. "It doesn't mean what she did was okay. It just means it doesn't own you anymore." I turned to look at him, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't forgive her for her. I forgave her for me. He smiled, leaning in to kiss the corner of my mouth. "That's the bravest thing you've ever done." Later, as we curled into bed, his chest warm against my back, I felt sleep pull at me with gentle fingers. Before darkness claimed me, I whispered into the hush Nathan broke me. Stephanie betrayed me. But I rebuilt myself from the wreckage, stronger, softer, freer. Outside, the city hummed and pulsed with life. Inside, in the quiet dark of our room, Zachary's breathing slowed to the rhythm of sleep, steady and comforting. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear. Because forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was freedom. And I was finally free. I've shared my story with you, the darkness, the betrayal, the heartbreak that shattered me into pieces too small to name. But I've also shared the way those pieces came back together, not into the woman I was before, but into someone stronger, softer, and truer than I ever imagined I could be. Now, I want to hear yours. Have you ever experienced a loss so painful it felt like dying, only to realize it led you to something far better than what you lost? Tell me your story. Share it here so others who are still walking through their own darkness can see the light at the end. Your words might be the lantern that guides them home. If my journey resonated with you, your support keeps this space alive, a space for stories, for healing, for remembering that pain doesn't get the final word. Thank you truly for listening. Thank you for sitting with me in the shadows and watching the dawn rise together. Because sometimes the hardest endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings.